Welcome to the Nervous System Care and Healing Podcast, where we talk about how to take care of ourselves in mind, in body, in spirit, while we navigate systems that were designed to keep us dysregulated. I'm your host, Liz, a neurodivergent therapist of color, and I'm really glad that you're here. Hey everyone. So today's episode will be particularly relevant and helpful if you are a caregiver or parent of a neurodivergent child. Whether your child or children are autistic, ADHD, PDA, something else, or a mixture of different neurotypes, whether they have high, medium, or low support needs, you may have noticed that mainstream parenting advice doesn't always make sense for you, for your child, or for your family's needs. So in this episode, my guest Carolyn and I dive into the differences between mainstream parenting approaches and neurodiversity-affirming parenting approaches. The former tends to emphasize control, hierarchy, and obedience, whereas the latter values connection, autonomy, and nervous system co-regulation. We will explore what it looks like to actually attune to the needs of each child's nervous system, and why the term PDA, which is often referred to as pathological demand avoidance, is better framed and understood as persistent drive for autonomy. We'll also explore how an alternative paradigm of parenting, one that humanizes children fully and prioritizes that connection over compliance, might also ask us to deconstruct core beliefs about ourselves, about how we think relationships are supposed to work. And it might require us to reflect on some feelings about the ways that we were parented and how that may or may not have served us. So keep listening to join us for a deeply honest conversation that might help you feel less alone. And it'll remind you that connection with your child begins with connection with yourself. All right, without further ado, let me introduce you to today's guest. Dr. Carolyn Solo, PhD, LCSW, is an EMDR consultant and EMDR intensive therapist in Vermont and Pennsylvania. She specializes in EMDR intensives for parents of neurodivergent kids and also has extensive training in working intensively with dissociative disorders. Carolyn provides coaching and support for EMDR therapists who want to launch high-ticket intensives in their practices to provide clients with exceptional outcomes while also providing therapists with time and financial freedom. Carolyn is also a mom of 3 girls, the oldest of whom is PDA profile ADHD. Carolyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to start off, I'd love to ask what brought you to this work and why do you do the work that you do?
So as my bio says, I am the mom of 3 daughters, and my oldest daughter, who is about to be 10 in August, is PDA profile ADHD. ADHD is she has a diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And I do like to preface that by saying she has moderate to high support needs, because sometimes I think in the autism space, there's a lot of focus on lower support needs individuals, which is not wrong, but I think, I like to make it clear that my daughter has some significant challenges that really impact how she functions in the world.
Absolutely.
Like she has, for example, selective mutism. She has a lot of developmental delays. She has no cognitive delays, but a lot of her presentation can make it really challenging to navigate like the school environment in a way that requires a lot of support, for example. And then PDA profile is a theorized profile of autism that is gaining, I don't want to say popularity, but understanding in the United States. But they're like in the UK, for example, they have been talking about PDA profile for a lot longer. So it is not in the DSM, but it's a theorized profile of autism. The words I prefer to use for this acronym stand for pervasive drive for autonomy. There is a more clinical and pathologizing term PDA standing for pathological demand avoidance. But I actually think that persistent drive for autonomy is more accurate in describing what a PDA presentation looks like. And what it means is that someone with a PDA profile, their nervous system is incredibly activated by the sense that their autonomy is being infringed upon, that their ability to make choices, both about themselves, about their environment, if they feel like those choices are infringed upon in any way, they have a very strong nervous system response in a way that makes it very, very difficult to really meet any of their other basic needs. It kind of overrides all of their other physiological and psychological needs. So, for example, a child who maybe their PDA shows up in terms of feeding. If a parent or someone else says to them, you need to try this broccoli, that's going to activate that drive for autonomy and really cause incredible distress. And over time, because the world as we know it is not kind to neurodivergent individuals, that stress builds up and often leads to burnout, which can be quite disabling. My daughter actually is just coming out of about 1.5 years of really significant burnout where for 6 to 8 months of that time, she wasn't getting dressed. She wasn't leaving the couch. She didn't go to school at all. She was eating 3 or 4 different foods and that was it. She was barely speaking. And now we have invested a lot of time and energy and money into helping her move through this experience. And she's really in a much better place. But we're also super conscious of maintaining a lifestyle that allows a lot of recovery so that maybe we can't prevent, but we can reduce the likelihood of additional burnout or, of course we can't prevent it, but.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. It's so helpful to hear. Well, also the more affirming version of that acronym, because it's true, the original version, well, it's pathologizing because the word pathological demand avoidance, it's in that term. So the pervasive drive for autonomy, a persistent drive for autonomy makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
And
it's not just about demands. That's the other piece of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm also reflecting on how, like, with the idea of burnout, often perhaps the common association is that, like, if an adult works too much at their job, then they get burnt out, as opposed to, like, a kid can also get burnt out. And to your point that we may not always be able to prevent entirely the causes of that burnout because of the way our society is structured, but that we can help people recover from it. So I'm curious what it's looked like to kind of adjust the lifestyle, the supports in your daughter's life to help maybe make recovery easier.
Yeah. So I feel very fortunate in that my best friend from childhood, who is still my best friend now, her child is PDA and went through a very severe burnout period, about 3 years. She's sort of about 3 years ahead of us in the journey. And so my friend kind of was like, I think there might be some PDA going on with your kiddo. And that was what really helped me start to learn about it. And so also she has been an incredible resource for me in terms of saying, like, this is what burnout recovery can look like, and connecting me with really vital resources that really provide a lot of support for parents, because so much about burnout recovery is antithetical to mainstream parenting advice. So, for example, we pulled our child out of school entirely. She was in 2nd grade. She'd been there for 1 month, and it was very clear she was not okay. And so we pulled her out completely. We didn't homeschool her. We deschooled her, which is not even unschooling. We just took away anything resembling school. Technically, she was homeschooled because you have to say that you're doing something by law. But so we were homeschooling her, but there was no schooling happening. We knew that she needed to have as few demands on her as possible to allow her nervous system to recover. And we also knew from, thankfully, my friend and the resources that she had provided, that this was not going to take 1 month. This was not going to take 2 months. This could take a really long time. And that it was okay and likely that she would retreat into her own world of activities that soothe her nervous system, which for her meant playing a lot of Minecraft, watching a lot of YouTube shorts. Stuff that mainstream parenting advice says very, very bad, 2 hours of screen time a day is max, and this is my child, what my child needed. It's not the same for all children, but she needed to revert entirely into her internal world that was predictable, that was safe, where she could choose the level of stimulation that she wanted. And we also let her eat all of her meals on the couch. I mean, let her sounds like, yeah, but I think in the mainstream perspective, we were letting her. We really dropped a lot of demands around bathing. She didn't have to get dressed. She didn't leave the house for months.
Mm-hmm.
And we just let her gradually, by following her lead, start to add things in a way that she could tolerate. It still wasn't perfect in that she still had, often they're called meltdowns. I heard someone use the term neurocrash the other day, and I decided that's my new word for a meltdown. I would never tell anyone else what word to use, but anyway, so neurocrash, she still had, very intense responses because we couldn't control everything in her environment. She has two siblings, two younger siblings who can be loud. And so there were still moments where she was very activated, but we could take away a lot of demands that would have just prolonged that burnout period. And I think what can be the hardest thing about a child being in burnout is just holding that faith as a parent that this will work, because it does take a really long time. And you are hearing a lot of other people, whether you're looking for that input or not, that what you are doing is wrong. It's harmful. It's not having boundaries. It's letting them get away with stuff. It's that they're lazy, like all this stuff. So having the trust in your child that they will let you know what they need, and having trust in yourself as a parent that you are the expert on your child. But that is very hard. I say that as if I have a lot of hindsight now. And the shame and guilt that parents feel is huge. So I think that's getting back to, you asked how I got into this work of working with parents of neurodivergent kids, is because I know intimately how isolating it is, how much you doubt yourself as a parent, how much shame you feel, and how difficult it is to trust yourself and your child because everything and everyone else is telling you you're wrong. But I'm also very blessed to have a therapist who truly gets it as well. So I know the value of that. I just know how important it is to provide that to other parents.
Yeah.
And I also know that our nervous systems as parents from, managing this stuff at home we're hypervigilant. Like I'm always waiting when we go out in public, which she chooses to do now. This is her choice. But I'm still trying to manage the environment, to reduce stimulation, make sure she has her headphones, make sure she has her stuffy that she needs to bring with her. Does she have her Spotify playlist accessible? Is her phone charged so she can listen to it? I'm scanning the environment she's terrified of dogs. Is there a dog nearby? Is someone going to drop something and it's going to be really loud? Is there a way we can get to the car quickly if we need to? That's level of hypervigilance, over time is really wearing.
I mean, my heart goes out just hearing the love and care and wanting to protect your child from the most overwhelming parts of the world, and also knowing that there are elements of that they may have to navigate or may choose to navigate as they come out of their burnout.
Right. I just know how vital it is for parents to feel seen in that and feel truly understood and not judged, because we're judging ourselves constantly. The last thing we need is someone else who doesn't understand our experience telling us we're doing it wrong.
And I imagine this is really validating for a lot of people to hear who may be in a similar experience as you.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could share, if there's more you want to share about how being a parent of a neurodivergent child with significant support needs has impacted personal life or your professional life, as well as your nervous system.
Sure. In terms of personal, especially when she was in deep burnout, our world, my entire family's world, shrunk out of necessity. And it was not my preference for it to shrink in the way that it did, but it was necessary. It has impacted how the siblings relate to one another. Her younger sisters having to process the fact that some of the expectations we have for them cannot apply to their older sister because she doesn't have the capacity for it, and helping them feel seen and holding that because they're children and that's, their reality, but also trying to cultivate empathy for their sister too. Managing dynamics with extended family. My oldest, travel is very, very hard for her. And we don't live near either of our extended families. So she's not been able to go visit at times or have them come visit us because it's too activating. We've certainly had to cut people out of our life who don't support how we live.
That sounds really painful and really unfortunate and stressful that happens, that as you're making the changes to really meet the needs of your child and your family, that, I almost feel this sort of grief of there's loss in terms of relationships and judgment. And
that's one of the things I try to normalize for parents is that it is okay to grieve the loss of the life you thought you would have with your family. In fact, it's vital. Because you can't ignore, you can suppress that if you want, but it's there. I also try to normalize that it puts a ton of strain on the co-parents, the co-parenting relationship. Certainly, sometimes, often, the parents aren't totally aligned in how they see what's going on and how to manage what's happening in their family. There's often one parent who's the deep diver, the researcher, the one who's we need to do this and we need to do that and we need to do that. And the other parent often isn't holding that same amount of emotional labor. And then sometimes we'll say, well, why are we doing this? This doesn't seem right. And the other parent feels like, hey, I have been reading about this for 6 months. You need to trust me. Also, it impacts the amount of time that the couple can have together.
Right.
When one of us always has to be home with one child, that impacts a lot of how we would how we thought our family was going to look. It's certainly very hard. It's very hard to find childcare that we trust. So, my husband and I probably go on, quote, date nights a couple times a year when my parents are visiting and my mom stays with them for one evening. And even that's a lot. So personal life there. Professional life, I've had to embrace a really flexible work schedule, which I'm okay with, but in some ways, it sounds great, and it's also very challenging at times.
Yeah, and it takes work to build that.
It takes tons of work to build that.
Yeah.
I have to be available if the school calls me. I have to be available to take her or my husband, but I have the more flexible work, so it's often me. I have to be available to she has 5 different appointments a week. I have to be able to bring her to all of them. She needs a lot of co-regulation. So being present for that, even if I'm, quote, working from home, I also have part of me is in the other room with her, wondering, is everything in there okay? And then I feel very guilty towards whoever I'm trying to be present with in my office. It's a lot. There's a lot of internal conflict that I feel like I'm not giving enough to either any part of, any person in my life, whether it's work or, my children. But I've had to become incredibly flexible with how I schedule my time because I just can't have a 9 to 5 schedule every day and be out of the house. That's just not practical or possible.
Right. I can't even imagine how that would work with that level of attunement toward the needs of the family nervous system. So I'm really hearing how it's this question of capacity, not only for your child, but also the ways in which you have to tend to your capacity to hold that space with her or the family or couples. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
And then to bring in another layer of this, I know that you've mentioned that you also received a late in life diagnosis of ADHD. So I'd love to hear how that has impacted you, shaped your perspective on yourself, life, personal, professional, everything. I know these things can affect everything.
Yeah, so interesting because it's a very recent diagnosis, actually. However, I think mostly what I was hearing from friends were friends of mine who were getting diagnosed, past 40. and talking about that and sort of looking to me and saying, well, have you ever looked into this? And I would always, me? Like, me? What do you mean? I had never considered that for myself. And then finally, long story, but like a business coach I was working with who has ADHD, in one of our meetings said, well, I'm obviously a lot of people like you are drawn to work with me because of my ADHD diagnosis and because you have ADHD. And I was like, wait, what? And she said, I didn't realize. I thought you had an ADHD diagnosis. And then she said, my mistake. I apologize. But that, along with what people had been saying to me for a long time, and my psychiatrist had sort of floated it a couple of times, I finally thought, okay, let me just go ahead and see what there is to this. And my psychiatrist did a evaluation and she said, yeah, you fit the diagnostic criteria. And I started taking medication and it's helped me tremendously. And now I can start to look back at the patterns that I have had throughout my entire life through a different lens.
Yeah, totally.
Instead of being like, I'm just a messy person, or I hate doing chores, or things that honestly, even though I tried to pass them off, I really thought of as a character flaw on some level. But now I'm able to understand differently, like that's actually not what is happening. I've often felt very scattered. I've had periods of my own burnout. I didn't call it that at the time, but where I've had to take a couple of months off of work for a variety of reasons at different times. And now I can look back with this different perspective and it makes so much sense. I think I'll just say this, and I wonder if this resonates with other people. I felt like I didn't deserve to own that identity. I didn't want to take that from people who I felt like actually, I didn't want to co-opt an identity that I felt like maybe I was just using to my advantage or something.
Yeah, I think that's can be a common sentiment for folks who are later diagnosed or were higher masking or maybe lower support needs compared to what the highest support needs could be.
Yeah, because I've always been driven and high achieving, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and so I sort of felt like, that's not fair to people who really need support or something for me to take on that label. And then, that's something I had to kind of deconstruct for myself. My daughter is ADHD. We know there's a genetic component to these kinds of things. It's got to come from somewhere. And I look back in my own family and my husband's, although he has a harder time with this, so I don't, that's his journey. I mean, I can see it. That's all I can say now. I look back and I say, okay, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an identity that I have two brothers. I'm the middle child, and they both struggled in school a lot. And I was very academic. So I wasn't allowed to be like a problem in that way. Like I had to be, no one told me that, but I internalized that role. So I wasn't allowed to struggle, right? Because they were really struggling. So, it wasn't like I wasn't allowed to struggle in that way.
Yeah.
So that's all been part of the journey for me. And looking at how sometimes my business life, I run kind of chaotically, and I own that, and like it makes a lot more sense now. And I feel like with the medication and with even this new lens, I've been thinking more proactively about ways to structure my life that supports that.
That's so insightful. And it reminds me of how, with some folks who are later diagnosed, it's like having spent so much of life kind of making it work. It's like, oh yeah, this is fine. I made it work. But it's like no one can see the internal cost of that, the invisible struggles or the invisible aspects of having a neurodivergent brain. And it sounds kind of meta that I'm guessing this was after your daughter received her diagnosis and then you learned this about yourself. So what a parallel-ish experience.
And this is very common with parents of neurodivergent kids is when their children are going through the diagnostic process, there's this self-reflection that happens. And I think there's grief there too that, speaking as myself and as the parent, no one noticed this about me. I think what's so important is making a space for parents to be able to say the stuff it feels like they are afraid to say out loud. Like, not only do maybe I resent my own parents, maybe I feel not resentment towards my child, but like, wow, look what they're getting that I didn't have. What would it have been like for me? And that can feel like a very difficult emotion to have towards your own child. Complex,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really deep thing to touch into. And it's really real.
It is. Yeah. And it's ongoing. I mean, I think even though my daughter is emerging from this very long burnout, and my hope is that for her, that she doesn't have to go through something that difficult again. I don't know the future for her. And I want to attune as much as I possibly can. And she is growing and developing and changing, and it's her journey. I don't know. It is very hard not to look ahead and, as a parent, period. But when you have a child for whom the world is a much harder place to navigate, it is scary to look ahead to that and to realize that some of the things that you assumed might happen might not, and that there are things that might not be possible for them. Yeah, it's hard, but also trying to parent in the present as much as possible, although it's very hard, and be like, okay, what are their needs now, today? And as opposed to, what if this never happens? It's like,
yeah. I'm really thinking about how with the neuro-affirming parenting and this attunement to the child's needs, need for autonomy, all the needs, how that is different from how parenting is traditionally talked about, and that there's a reason that neuro-affirming parenting works better for kids, probably not just neurodivergent kids, but for a lot of and that's the thing with most neuro-affirming things are helpful for everyone. It's just maybe neurodivergent folks, higher support needs, they're the ones who need it more than other. But I'm curious if you could share what are some of the differences you see between the affirming approach and maybe less affirming approaches? Yeah. And what would you like parents to know about this journey of embarking on neuro-affirming care?
I think a lot of traditional parenting approaches are very dehumanizing of children. Mm-hmm. They're very control-based. Yeah. And there's this sense that adults, and they're hierarchical, right? Which is one of the things that PDA kiddos really push back against. And like, why do I have to listen to you because you're my parent? Right? Like, not from a, not in PDA is often misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder, which is a diagnosis that I hope disappears forever at some point. But like, that's interpreted as defiance by sort of traditional parents, right? As opposed to a child who genuinely feels affronted by that. And like in danger.
And it doesn't make sense to them in any right. And it's a threat response.
It's a threat response, yeah. And so the humility as a parent that you take on in that paradigm is really difficult for a lot of parents and teachers and care providers who work with children. We don't make my child eat dinner at the table, for example. We don't make any of us eat dinner at the table, actually. That's just a non-negotiable for a lot of parents. We must have dinner together as a family, as if that puts them on some sort of moral high ground. But that is an overstimulating and stressful environment for my child. So in the interest of the family's nervous system, it's not something that we have to do or that we do. And I think prioritizing connection and co-regulation first is not the normal parenting paradigm.
Which feels so odd to hear, but it's true, right? Yeah, the most base connection, co-regulation. Yeah. So important.
I mean, so much of traditional parenting is very behavioral, right? Like, do this and then you'll get this, or don't do this and then that happens. As opposed to, my child is having a hard time. How do I connect with them and make them feel safe first before whatever it is?
Right. Right.
And that's very hard. That's the other thing, is it's very challenging because it takes a lot of connection with yourself. It's very slow. it's not expedient. And I think all of that is counter to just our culture as a whole.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm also thinking like how much capacity it takes to tend to that connection to self, to be available for that safe connection with the kiddo's nervous system that may not have that capacity to self-regulate. I mean, when you break it down like so simple as traditional parenting kind of dehumanizes kids and it's very behavioral, do this, then that, don't do that, or this will happen. It's kind of making me see how so many of like power-based systemic issues kind of can come from this. That's a whole conversation, but the way we learn to treat each other, to be treated, starts in these early years and often in the home.
I often think of this, like we were taught, like, I feel like this is in like Victorian novels. Children should be seen and not heard.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, what?
Yeah. That's still so normalized in so many places. Yeah.
Basically, like children should be a decoration and not a person. But it is a real deconstruction of a lot of the ways that we ourselves were parented. It's a real radical departure. And that is not easy because most people don't look kindly on it. I remember we were at a restaurant last summer and my daughter had wanted to go and we were like, yes, she wants to go. And I forget exactly what the antecedent was, but she got really upset and screamed and threw her water glass. And I had to go over and like kind of get her to, I was like, we need to. And I heard this older man go up to the waitress and say, why are they allowed here? And I will say my mama bear, I'm not proud of this, but I went up to that man, I got in his face and I said, my daughter is autistic. She has every right to be in this space just like you do. If you don't like it, you're allowed to leave.
Yeah.
And I think I said it with more colorful language than that. And I don't think it was the best way to handle it, but
it was the moment and like you were having a response. Yeah. That's a very activating experience.
And then it was so sweet because when we went to pay our tab, the waitress said, oh, somebody at the bar paid it for you guys.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, but that's very, very, like right now recalling that experience, like I can feel myself getting, like my heart is starting to beat faster, like those moments. Yeah. And that's a lot of the moments I work through with parents stay with us.
It's hard to be whether it's the generation or the people who start to depart from the old ways, you're the thing that's splitting off from the massive wave of like, we're going to do things differently. We're going to unlearn stuff that's really uncomfortable to unlearn. And we're going to do it while most other people haven't unlearned that. And most people are holding this unconscious belief of like, children should be seen or not heard. Or like, I went through that, so everyone else should. When it's like, wait, we could stop. We could do things differently. And it's also really hard to be the ones at the cusp of that change while tending to one's own like inner child and reparenting and all that.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so I just have so much empathy for parents who are going through it too and who are at different stages of the journey and maybe aren't as lucky as I am to have a friend who had kind of trod this path before me and has accompanied me. She was actually just visiting us this weekend. Accompanied me on this journey, like every step of the way. Words cannot convey how grateful I am to have had that experience. And of course, she's late diagnosed ADHD as well. And we laugh about like, of course we found each other,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I really feel for parents who feel completely isolated and alone in this journey because there's a lot of people in that place.
Well, I'm grateful that you are a voice in this space that is so open and that you share this here and in all the other spaces that you share your work. I know it makes people feel less alone. So it's really beautiful and important work. What makes it so potent is how it comes from your lived experience. As we're ending here, I'd love to know what is one way you like to take care of your nervous system?
Well, I live in a very beautiful place, which I am tremendously grateful for. I live in Vermont, in northern Vermont, and I love the outdoors. I lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia until 2 years ago, but the plan to move here was it started during like early days of COVID, honestly, and took us 4 years to figure out. But my partner and I both love the outdoors and love all the sports all year round. And so
Nice.
for me, a priority is being outside and moving my body. And I will let a lot of other things go before that. And, that it doesn't look the way it did before I had children, of course, but it's still a priority. And that is so essential. And I love that even being able to just walk outside and have that accessible, even if I can't, spend an hour going for a bike ride, just being able to go for a 10-minute walk in nature is something that is vital for me. So that's huge. And community, finding community with other people who are on the same path is so important. And I just think in general, we are in a time where, community has always been vital, but prioritizing community is so important. And it's something that I think falls by the wayside very easily because of the way our life is structured. But that is so important as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a lifeline, community, nature. And I do love Vermont, having lived there for a handful of years. It's stunning.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, and finally, if listeners would like to connect with you, learn more about working with you, could you tell us how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. So the Instagram for my therapy account, I also do some parent coaching, which I don't advertise very much. Maybe I should more, but for people that are not able to come to Vermont or live in Vermont or Pennsylvania, because I'm licensed in both states. My Instagram is @integritas, which I used to be a Latin teacher, so it's a Latin word.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's.
Does it mean integrity?
It means integrity. It means wholeness.
Nice.
You can put it in the show notes, so I don't have to spell it out. But Integritas _intensive _EMDR is my Instagram, and then my website is integritaswellnessllc.com. And those are my, therapeutic. Like I have another business, but that's not less applicable to your listeners probably. That's about business
Unless
coaching.
They're both a therapist and a parent.
I also do business coaching for therapists who want to launch intensives in their practice. And that's my other big thing. And
Amazing.
I have a lot of blog posts on my website about neurodivergent parenting, how to find a therapist who's neuro-affirming, a variety of things like that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And because we mentioned it a lot in your bio, do you want to give a brief blurb about what is an EMDR intensive and why you do those?
Sure. So an EMDR intensive could look like a variety of things. An EMDR is a therapeutic modality. It's a trauma processing modality that's more kind of somatically and emotion bottom-up based than more talk therapy approaches. And, people can look it up if they want a full description of it. But it's grounded in research, and there's a lot of support for it. And I also have some training in another modality, internal family systems, and I'm getting some training in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And those are all very much bottom-up, tending to the nervous system modalities. And what I find is that often the 50-minute traditional therapy session just doesn't provide the time and space needed for deep work, like with this population that I'm talking about, whereas an intensive, which the model I use it's 3 days and 15 hours divided over 3 days, where we really work in a very deep way and try to make some really substantial progress on whether it's current parenting triggers or how past life experience shows up in our parenting, so that people can go back and really feel different. So I have experienced this modality myself as a client, and I find it really profoundly transformative for my own clients. And I have people, not to disclose too much, but I just had a consult call with someone this morning who's coming from several states away in a couple of months to work with me. So I love that model. Like people come at kind of like a retreat.
And to be able to travel to Vermont for a healing retreat just sounds like the ultimate experience. So
it's very nice.
Great,
it's a great option.
That. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn, for being here, sharing your story and wisdom. And I know this will help and validate a lot of people. So really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, because this is something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope it does provide makes someone feel heard and seen.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nervous System Care and Healing podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And if you ever have a few minutes to leave a rating and review, it would mean so much to me, and it helps other people to find the podcast and spread the care. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, coaching, or professional mental health services. The information shared here is generalized, it may not reflect every individual nuance, and it should not be interpreted as personalized mental health advice. So please do seek out additional support if you need it. Take care and be well. This is Liz at Nervous System Care and Healing.